Dubois's expression was cold. Intuition is the residue of a lifetime of knowledge, not a substitute for it. He turned his piercing gaze to Leo. Monsieur? Leo stepped forward, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a profound sense of purpose. He picked up one of his grandfather's journals, already opened to the correct page. He called it diaphragmatic tuning. Leo began, his voice clear and steady. He theorized that by making the lower wing of the F-hole infinitesimally more flexible than the upper, he could create a micro-vibrational asymmetry. It required a unique 5-stage cut with a blade he forged himself, one that shaves the wood at a near horizontal angle on the final pass. He didn't stop there. He walked to the workbench, picked up the very blade he had described, and took a spare piece of spruce. His movements were not the hesitant gestures of a novice, but the confident, economical motions of a seasoned practitioner. As everyone watched, spellbound, he replicated the initial stages of the complex cut, his hands moving with an inherited grace. The scent of freshly cut spruce filled the air. He let me practice on scrap pieces for years, Leo said, his focus entirely on his work. He said that a millimeter's deviation could mean the difference between a masterpiece and a piece of firewood. He said it was a conversation between the hand, the tool, and the wood spirit. He set the tool down. The silence in the room was absolute. Clara's face was a mask of disbelief and rage. Julian looked utterly deflated, the poet stripped of his words. Monsieur Dubois walked over and examined the small piece of wood. He looked at it for a long time before turning to Mr. Albright. A genuine, warm smile finally transformed his severe features. "There is no question," Dubois announced, his voice resonating through the workshop. "The spirit of the luthier resides here." He gestured not at the collection, but at Leo. "The will is clear. The legacy is secure." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Faced with Dubois' unequivocal verdict, the legal challenge evaporated. Clara and Julian vanished from Leo's life for a final time, leaving behind nothing but a bill for their legal fees and the stale memory of their avarice. Months later, the workshop was no longer a place of grief, but of quiet reverence and burgeoning purpose. Leo had not returned to his architectural firm. He'd entrusted his projects to his partners, finding he could no longer design buildings of steel when his heart was full of spruce and maple. He hadn't sold a single instrument. Instead, he had begun the meticulous process of transforming the estate into the Alastair Finch Foundation, a museum dedicated to the art of violin making and a school for a new generation of luthiers. This evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and rose, Leo stood before the unfinished seraphim. He picked up his grandfather's tool. He was not a master, not yet, but he was a custodian, a guardian of a sacred trust. He would complete the violin, not for fame or for profit, but for the man who taught him that the most beautiful things in life are built with patience, dedication, and a love that resonates long after the creator is gone. The silence of the workshop was no longer deafening. It was filled with the hum of a legacy, waiting for its song to be completed. Clara's approach was more venomous. "It is our birthright. We are the artists in this family. This This clause is a farce, a deliberate insult. We will contest this absurdity." Leo remained impassive, the words of the will echoing in his mind. It wasn't a challenge. It was a confirmation. His grandfather knew his heart. The fight was not for the monetary value of the collection, a fortune his own career had already rendered unnecessary. It was a battle for the sanctity of Alistair's legacy. The ensuing weeks were a maelstrom of legal threats and acrimonious correspondence. Clara and Julian hired an aggressive lawyer who painted Leo as a calculating usurper, and them as aggrieved, devoted children robbed of their heritage. They spoke to anyone who would listen, spinning tales of a reclusive father and a grandson who had slowly poisoned him against his own kin. Leo, in response, did not engage in the public spectacle. Instead, he retreated to the workshop. He spent his nights poring over Alistair's journals, leather-bound volumes filled with his elegant script. They contained more than just varnish recipes and acoustic theorems. They were diaries of a life dedicated to perfection. He traced the sketches of scrolls, the intricate calculations for F-holes, the philosophical musings on the nature of sound. He ran his hands over the cool, smooth planes and chisels, the memories of his grandfather's lessons flooding back, not as distant echoes, but as tangible instructions. The executor, Mr. Albright, caught between the two factions, proposed a resolution to honor the will's codicil. He would engage a neutral arbiter, an expert of international renown, to assess the claimants. The name he proposed made Leo's breath catch: Monsieur Antoine Dubois, a legendary Parisian appraiser and a contemporary of Alistair. The two had corresponded for 50 years, sharing discoveries and a profound mutual respect, though they had rarely met. Dubois was the ultimate authority. Clara and Julian, confident in their ability to feign artistic depth, readily agreed. The day of the assessment was overcast, the gray light lending a solemnity to the workshop. Monsieur Dubois arrived, a small, bird-like man with eyes that seemed to see not just the surface of things, but their very composition. He greeted Clara and Julian with a curt nod, his gaze sweeping over their ostentatiously artistic attire. He then turned to Leo, and for a fleeting moment, a glimmer of recognition, of shared understanding, passed between them. Dubois began his tour of the workshop, his movements fluid and reverent. He barely spoke, letting his fingertips drift over the seasoned timber, the half-finished instruments, the rows of tools. Clara and Julian followed, offering a constant stream of unsolicited commentary. Father had such a profound connection to the essence of the wood. Julian pontificated, gesturing vaguely at a rack of maple. It was his passion, his very soul, Clara added, a dramatic hand on her chest. We, as fellow artists, understand that language. Dubois paused, picking up a small unlabeled block of dark wood. "And what is this?" he inquired, his voice soft but sharp as a scalpel. Julian blinked. "A piece of wood, of course. For a violin Pernambuco," Leo said quietly from the back. "For a bow. You can tell by the density and the deep red hue when held to the light. Grandfather believed the bow was the breath, and the violin was the lung." Dubois's eyes flickered toward Leo, a subtle arch of an eyebrow his only acknowledgement. He continued, his questions growing more specific, his traps more intricate. He asked about the Venetian masters, about the properties of amber resin and varnish, about the tonal differences produced by arching variations. With each question, Clara and Julian's ignorance became more apparent. Their answers were a tapestry of vague platitudes about feeling and spirit, a flimsy defense against Dubois's precise technical inquiries. Finally, Dubois led them to the centerpiece of the workshop, a violin resting under a velvet cloth. It was Alistair's magnum opus, the project of his final decade, left tantalizingly incomplete. He unveiled it. The instrument was breathtaking, its wood shimmering with an inner fire, the scroll a masterpiece of fluid carving. It was, however, missing its F holes. My friend Alistair was working on this instrument, which he called the Seraphim, Dubois explained. He wrote to me about a unique challenge he was facing with the final voicing. He mentioned a specific, unconventional method for the placement and cutting of the F-holes, a technique he developed to enhance the lower register's warmth without sacrificing brilliance. He turned to the parents. "Describe this technique to me." Silence. Clara and Julian exchanged panicked glances. "It was an intuitive process," Clara stammered. "He would feel the resonance and simply know where to cut." The lingering aroma of aged spruce and rosin, a scent that had defined his existence, clung to Leo's clothes like a phantom embrace. It was the perfume of his sanctuary, the ghost of his guardian. Master Alistair Finch, his grandfather, was gone, and the silence in the sprawling workshop was a deafening counterpoint to the decades of meticulous creation it had witnessed. Leo, now a celebrated architect whose design sculpted city skylines, felt like an unmoored ship in this quiet harbor of his youth. His own world was one of steel, glass, and calculated voids, yet his soul was carved from the timber and varnish of this place. His parents, Clara and Julian, had been phantoms of a different sort. They were perpetual aspirants, chasing an ever-receding mirage of artistic glory. They saw themselves as misunderstood prodigies, a painter and a poet who believed the world owed them accolades. A child, to them, was not a creation, but an anchor, a tether to a mundane reality they desperately sought to escape. They had deposited a 5-year-old Leo at Alistair's doorstep, with hollow promises of a swift return, then dissolved back into their bohemian fantasy, their visits becoming sporadic, disruptive apparitions. They would waft in on a cloud of turpentine and cheap wine, critique Alistair's quaint lifestyle, bestow upon Leo a careless pat on the head, and vanish, leaving a wake of confusion and the lingering sting of neglect. Alistair never spoke ill of them. Instead, he filled the void they left with wonders. He was a luthier, a master craftsman who breathed life into wood, transforming maple and spruce into violins that wept and sang with celestial voices. The workshop was a cathedral of potential. Sunlight filtered through dust motes dancing in the high windows, illuminated racks of seasoning timber, jars of luminous resins, and tools that seemed extensions of the old man's hands. Alistair taught Leo not just the craft, but the philosophy behind it. "Patience, my boy," he would murmur, his voice a low hum like a cello's C-string, "is the soul of resonance. You cannot rush what needs time to become itself." He taught Leo to read the grain of wood like a map, to understand the alchemy of varnish, to feel the perfect tension of a soundpost. This was Leo's true inheritance, a legacy of discipline, artistry, and unwavering devotion. The formal bequeathal came a week after the funeral in a sterile solicitor's office that felt worlds away from the workshop's organic warmth. The solicitor, a man named Mr. Albright, read Alistair's last will and testament in a dry monotone. The estate, including the historic residence, the workshop, and its contents, a collection of instruments valued in the millions, was left entirely to Leo. Clara and Julian, who had appeared looking artfully sorrowful, stiffened. A low hiss escaped Clara's lips. Then Mr. Albright read the crucial codicil, the part Alistair had clearly penned with foresight. The beneficiary of my life's work, it stated, must not merely possess these articles, but must demonstrate a profound comprehension of the luthier's art and a spirit dedicated to its preservation. This must be validated by an impartial and recognized authority in the field. The room erupted. "This is an outrage," Julian declared, his poetic sensibilities giving way to raw fury. He was a senile old man. Our son, the builder of sterile towers, knows nothing of art. He manipulated our father,